My name is Royce West. I am your state senator. Can you tell me what a state senator is? All right.
Old.
Old? Well, I guess I am kind of old. That was a good answer. Yes, I am kind of old. I'm 47 years old. Is that old?
No.
47? That's not old, is it?
No.
Okay. Well, let me tell you what a state senator is. A state senator is a representative who represents your families in Austin. Like there are three branches of government. One is the judicial branch of government where we have all of our judges. And then we have the executive branch of government, which is headed up by the governor. And then we have the legislative branch of government, which has two separate parts to it, one being the House of Representatives and the other one being the state Senate. And so I'm a member of the state Senate. And there are only 31 of us in the entire state of Texas. Each of us represent roughly 600,000 people. 600,000 people. That's a lot of people to represent. So I've got to make sure that when your parents think that there's an issue of importance in Austin, that I represent their views in Austin. But this morning, I'm here with you at Phyllis Wheatley Elementary School. It's really a pleasure being here with you, and let me tell you why. I used to go to Phyllis Wheatley when I was a kid. Well, I was in the 6th grade when I was here. And what grade are you in? Third grader. So you're going to be at Phyllis Wheatley for a long time. And let me tell you, there's a lot of rich history. There are people that have attended this particular school that are doing quite well in everyday life as business persons, teachers, doctors, lawyers. And by the way, I'm a lawyer also. The name of this story is what?
Ringgold. If a bus could talk.
If a bus could talk. All right. The story of Rosa Parks. All right, I want y'all to look at keep this picture in mind as I'm reading, okay? All right. This morning, a strange-looking bus pulled up at my stop. It didn't look anything like my usual bus, but it was time, and I didn't want to be late for school, so I decided to take it. The door opened, and a voice called out, "Step up, young lady." I got on thinking, I'll ask the driver which bus this is. All right. It's not the bus that she would normally get on, but she got on anyway because she didn't want to be late for school. All right. So she's sitting on the bus now, right? Huh? See? Okay. But the bus driver was not in his seat. I paid my fare and looked around for him. There were lots of passengers, but their faces weren't familiar. I started to ask one of them if I was on the right bus, but before I could, the doors closed and the bus pulled away from the curve with no one in the driver's seat. Wait a minute. There's a bus. It pulled away, and there's no one in the driver's seat. The sudden start sent me reeling down the aisle, and I landed in a seat holding on for dear life. None of the other passengers seemed to notice anything was wrong. "Stop this bus and let me off," I shouted. I want a bus with a driver." "Please don't take that seat, Marcie," someone said. "How do you know my name? Which one of you is speaking?" I asked, looking around. But the passengers were talking amongst themselves, reading, or just staring out the window. "This is a special bus, Marcie, and you are sitting in a special seat reserved for a very special person." "Amen, amen," chorused the passengers. "What bus is this?" I asked. This bus to be the Cleveland Avenue bus, but now it's the Rosa Parks bus. She is the patron saint of the civil rights movement. One day a year, we reserve that seat in her name. Take another seat and I will tell you about her. Now the voice seemed to be coming from the bus itself. I could hardly believe it. I was on a talking bus. Trembling with fear, but curious as I could be, I took a seat across the aisle and settled down to hear this remarkable story. Must be a picture of Rosa Parks' family. Okay. Rosa McCauley, the first child of James and Leona McCauley, was born February the 4th, 1913 in Tuskegee, Alabama. When Rosa was 2 years old, her father, a skilled carpenter and house builder, left the family and went up north looking for work. Her mother took Rosa and Sylvester, her baby brother, to live on their grandfather's small farm in Pine Level, Alabama. They worked hard there, raising chickens, calves, vegetables, nuts, and fruits. Rosa helped her grandfather clear weeds and tend the crops. The family also picked cotton in the neighboring fields. How many of you have ever lived or gone to a farm? Ever been on a farm? If you get a chance, I want you to ask your mothers and fathers, or if you get a trip, to go on a farm so you can see all of the different animals, the calves, the fields, and everything else. It's an experience that you need to make sure that you take advantage of, okay? We know that Rosa Parks grew up on a farm. I guess this must be her grandmother right here talking to her, and this must be her in school. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Despite these fearful conditions that she lived under and her family lived under, because those were sometimes during those days people just did things against other people just because of the color of their skin. Rosa's grandfather was an outspoken old man who made it known that he had a loaded shotgun and was not afraid to use it to defend his home and family. Grandfather Sylvester instilled a sense of pride in his children and grandchildren, and in Rosa most of all. Rosa was a nice little girl who loved praise, but she hated the disrespectful way that other individuals treated black people. One day, a white boy threatened to punch her, and Rosa picked up a rock and threatened to hit him back if he did. When her grandmother heard about this, she was very afraid because she knew something like that might cause Rosa to get in trouble one day. When Rosa was 6 years old, she went to school. Her school had 50 to 60 children in one room and only one teacher. Can you imagine that? 50 to 60 students in one class and only one teacher. In Pine Level, Alabama, school for black children only went up to the 6th grade, and it was open only 5 months out of the year, while school for white children went through the 12th grade and was open for 9 months. And the white children could take a bus to school, while the black children often had to walk a long way. However, Rosa's mother, Leona, had plans for Rosa's education. Leona was a teacher in a one-room school in the village of Spring Hill. To teach there, she had to travel a long distance and then be away from her children all week. But she saved up so Rosa could further her education beyond the 6th grade. When Rosa was 11, she went to Mrs. White's School for Girls in Montgomery, Alabama. Several years later, Rosa went on to high school at Alabama State Teachers College for Negroes. She had to drop out of school when first her grandmother and then her mother became ill. Rosa's mother got well, but her grandmother later died. It looks like Rosa's working now. You know, she went to school. See, she's talking to her grandmother. She went to school. Looks like she's graduated from school and is working, and her transportation is the bus. Let's see what it says. Does everyone see that? Okay. After her mother recovered, Rosa went back to school and got her high school diploma, but there would be a few years before Rosa could find a job using her typing and writing skills. So she took in sewing and did alterations in Montgomery's Fair department store. One day, on the way home from work, the bus driver told Rosa to get off and enter at the back of the bus after she had paid her fare. Think about that. One day, on the way home from work, the bus driver told Rosa to get off and enter the back of the bus after she had paid her money. Why would someone do that? Do you have any idea? Well, let's find out. Then he drove off, leaving her in the street. This was a common practice then. It's no wonder that black people would often walk a mile or more to find to and from work rather than ride the segregated buses. So she paid her money. He told her to get off the bus and go to the back of the bus. And then when she got off the bus, to go to the back of the bus, he pulled off after she had paid her money. And she wasn't the only person that happened to back then. Okay? The buses were the worst form of segregation because black people could only sit in the back of the bus. If there were no whites in the middle section, blacks could sit there, but only if no white people were left standing. Black people couldn't sit in the same row with whites, even if there was an empty seat in that row. It was during those times I got to know and love Rosa Parks, said the talking bus. Remember, we're on a talking bus, right? The bus is telling the story. She was a great lady with quiet dignity despite all the cruelty she faced because of the color of her skin. Black people could not sit in the front of the bus because of the color of their skin. And not only could they not sit in the front of the bus, but there were other areas that they couldn't sit. Let me give you an example. There were certain stores that black people couldn't go in. They couldn't go in the front door, they had to go in the back door. Did you know that? No. Yeah, that's part of our history. That's segregation and what they call Jim Crow, but we'll get to that later. You'll get to that later as you go through school. That's why it's important to be in school. That's why it's important to read too, because I tell you, it opens up a lot of worlds for you. And I'm not going to sit up and tell you that I'm the type of person that likes to read each and every day, but I try to read something each and every day. I try to read things that I like to read. Even I have to read some things that I don't like reading too, but I still do that too. But then something good happened. Rosa married a very nice man named Raymond Parks. Parks, as she called him, was a black man like Grandfather Sylvester. He demanded to be treated with respect. Parks was light-skinned and had grown up in an all-white neighborhood. Although he looked like a white person, he was not allowed to go to the white school, and the nearest black school was too far away. So he had to be taught to read and write by his mother. Despite the fact that he had very little formal education, Parks was very well spoken and well read on the important issues affecting his people. It was Parks, Rosa's husband, who encouraged Rosa to return to school and graduate. Raymond Parks, a barber by trade, had been a longtime member of the NAACP. Now, I am a member of the NAACP. I am a life member of the NAACP. And as you grow, when you go home, you ask your parents, are they members of the NAACP? If they're not, you tell them that Senator West said that they need to become members of the NAACP. Okay? All right. You're going to tell them what? Become members of the NAACP. Right. Raymond Parks, a barber by trade, had been a longtime member of the NAACP, the National, and that means the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Mrs. Parks soon became a member too. In no time, she was appointed secretary of the Montgomery branch and could use her education to help her people. She also served as a youth leader and organized citywide youth conferences. Parks worked hard to free young men called Scottsboro Boys who were jailed for a crime they did not commit. Parks was also an activist for voter registration, and he and Rosa held regular meetings of the Voters League in their home. That was how Rosa finally registered to vote after being turned down 3 times before. Black people couldn't even register to vote back then. Couldn't vote. And now it's hard to get people to vote. When there were a lot of people during the civil rights movement that died for our right to vote. People today would rather use their credit cards on election day than their voter registration cards, and hopefully they'll get back to using their voter registration cards. But that's now. Here's another picture of Rosa on the bus, and I think we're getting ready to get to the point of this story that tells about her bravery in terms of the moment when the civil rights movement, when her actions became indicative of her being awarded and thought of as the saint or the mother of the civil rights movement. Okay? See, she's sitting on a bus and she's being taken off a bus. One fateful day, December the 1st, 1955, Mrs. Parks took this very bus home from work. The bus driver, whose name was James Blake, told Mrs. Parks to get up and give her seat to a white man. There were other black people sitting in the same section, and all of them would have to get up so that the white man could sit down. Rosa knew that the segregation laws were unfair, and right then and there, she decided to do something about it. She told the driver she would not give up her seat. This was the same bus driver who had wronged her before. This guy, Blake, told her to get off the bus to go in the back, and then he took off. The same bus driver. When Mrs. Parks refused to give up her seat, Blake called the police and had her arrested and taken to jail for breaking the segregation law. Think about that. You're old enough to understand. The police put her in jail because she would not give up her seat to a white man. Think about that. But that was then, and this is now. It is for this singular act of courage that one day a year, Mrs. Rosa Parks' seat has been reserved, said the talking bus. And why don't we want to see Blake driving this bus ever again? Do y'all want to see Blake driving that bus again?
No.
And amen, amen, the chorus of passengers said. How long did Mrs. Parks have to stay in jail? I asked. Not long, Marcie. When Mr. E.D. Nixon, the head of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP, heard of Mrs. Parks' arrest, he paid her bail and she was released. He asked her to help with a boycott to change the segregation laws. Rosa was happy to be a part of the citywide effort to end segregated buses. Mr. E.D. Nixon also asked the Women's Political Council and the town's black ministers to help organize and promote what came to be known all over the world as the Montgomery bus boycott. This is when they were organizing. Here's Mr. Nixon right here, getting her out of jail. She had to pay money in order to get out of jail, and money was hard to come by. This is when all of the people began to organize over here in the churches, and all of the people that felt the same way that Mrs. Parks felt, that it was wrong to judge a person by the color of their skin. One of the ministers was the pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, a young man by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Mr. Ed E. Nixon asked him to lead the boycott because he was new to the town and had great promise. The Dexter Avenue Baptist Church grew a large crowd that the night Dr. King told the people about the boycott. This was the beginning of Dr. King's leadership in the civil rights movement and the beginning of his many memorable speeches. On this day, Dr. King said, "We are tired of being segregated and humiliated, tired of being kicked about the brutal feet of oppression." For 381 days. Now, remind you, how many days are in a year? There are 365 days in a year. So for 381 days, more than a year, black people in Montgomery either walked or arranged their own carpools instead of taking the buses. Without the black passengers, the buses were almost empty. The city lost a lot of money. The Montgomery bus boycott was working. Amen, amen, said the passengers. We know, we were there. But as a result of the boycott, Dr. Martin Luther King was arrested and his home was bombed. Someone put a bomb in his house and blew up his house. Many others were arrested too and threatened with hateful letters, phone calls, and bombings. Now think about that. Here's a man that's trying to bring together all of God's children, and that the devil and the devil's disciples were out there working against him and would go as far as killing him in order to stop him from doing God's will, and that is bringing people together. And anyone else who attempted to do it, the devil's disciples were doing the same thing. The Montgomery boycott was the beginning of a national movement in which people of every race organized protest against segregation in their own towns. The boycott spread to department stores where black people were not allowed to return articles of clothing that they had brought or to try on clothes before buying them. You mean Mrs. Rosa Parks could not try on a pair of shoes or return a dress that did not fit? I asked. Yes, Marcie. I know it's difficult for young people today to understand what life under the segregation laws was really like, There was eat-ins too, where black people and white sympathizers would sit at, for white-only, lunch counters and have food poured over their head by the hissing crowds. Think about that. Here's some pictures. There were stores that they couldn't go in, restaurants they couldn't go in, swimming pools they couldn't swim in just because of the color of their skin. And if a black person got in the swimming pool, you know what would happen? All the white people would get out, and they would have to drain the water out. They would drain the water out before the white people would get back in. Did you know that? You need to understand your history. You need to understand your history. Okay? But there was no sadder sight for a hot summer day than black children outside a swimming pool displaying for white-only signs, where black kids couldn't get in. Mrs. Parks' case finally reached the highest court in our land, and on November the 13th, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was against the law. A little more than a month later, the boycott ended. Black people no longer had to ride in the back of the bus, but the struggle for equal rights was not over. Rosa lost her $25 a week job at the Montgomery Fair department store, and she continued to receive threatening phone calls and letters. A year later, Rosa and Rosa Parks moved to Detroit, where Rosa worked for Congressman John Conyers of Michigan. There she was able to help homeless people find decent jobs and community service. Mrs. Parks' struggle for equal rights continued. On August 28, 1963, at Dr. King's March on Washington, Rosa Parks was honored with a tribute to women awarded by the A. Philip Randolph Institute. However, she was not asked to speak. And later, when she heard on the radio that Dr. King had been shot, Rosa Parks and her mother joined hands and wept. Many tributes and awards have been given to this gentle, courageous woman. A bronze bust of Ms. Parks is installed in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. She was awarded the Spingarn Medal, the Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolence Peace Prize, the Eleanor Roosevelt Woman of Courage Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mrs. Parks has received countless honorary degrees, plaques, and honors for valiant acts of courage and unceasing dedication to freedom. But what this old bus is proudest of is that Cleveland Avenue, the street this bus ran on, has been renamed Rosa Parks Boulevard. In addition to all this, once a year, we get together to celebrate the great lady's birthday. Amen, amen, said the passengers. We know we were there. And just like that, the bus stopped and Mrs. Parks herself got on. All the passengers stood up to meet her. And when she greeted them by name, Parks, E.D. Nixon, Dr. King, and the rest, I remember them from her story. The once unfamiliar passengers now had faces I could never forget. I'm so excited to meet you, Mrs. Park, I said gleefully. You really are the mother of the civil rights movement, and I'm so lucky to be here. May I ask what gave you so much courage and belief in freedom? My belief in freedom goes way back to the days when my mother used to sing that old Negro spiritual. Oh, freedom over me, said Mrs. Parks. Let's sing it together. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Now it's time for you to cut your birthday cake, Mrs. Parks, said the talking bus. Mrs. Parks closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and blew out the candles. Happy birthday, Mrs. Parks, said the passengers, and may our dreams of freedom and equal opportunity for all people come true. We love you, and we thank you for being the lady who, by sitting down, inspired people all over the world to stand up for freedom. Amen, amen. We know we were there. By the time the talking bus reached my school, my head was crammed full of things that had happened. When I got up this morning, little did I know that I would be attending Mrs. Parks' birthday party on the very bus that she was arrested on. I can't wait to tell my class about this. The end. Remember Rosa Parks. Remember Rosa Parks. And like I said, about 2 years ago, she came to Dallas, and I had an opportunity to meet her and get her autograph in a book that I will cherish forever.
From the whole